Film prices today have gone completely out of hand, both the film stocks and the film cameras. On the other hand, the digital cameras today are practically perfect. They have perfect autofocus, they have perfect white balance. They have 100% true to the eye color and pixels and pixels and pixels of perfection. But film is about the imperfections, the grain, the grit, the color palette it provides, how the highlights bloom and sparkle. But what if we had a good mixture of both worlds? Enter the Canon G7X Mark II. The Canon G7X Mark II was quite a phenomenon when it came out in 2016. It was right when exactly kind of the vlogging world in YouTube was booming and everyone wanted a quick solution to their blogging or YouTube problems. So this camera actually had quite a cult following in terms of video capabilities, not much in terms of photo capabilities. And my relationship with this camera has been quite an odd one. I actually bought it secondhand for about $200 with the intention of shooting mainly video on it. Until I finally realized after a few weeks of using it that, well, this camera also takes photographs, so why not use it for photography? As time went on, I started to use it less and less as a video camera and more just as a pocket zoom camera. The form factor and kind of the looks of this camera make it seem as if the user is a mere tourist. Of course, there's nothing that looks more like film than using film, and there's nothing more satisfying about the photography process than using a film camera. But the more and more I study about film photograph characteristics, I notice that a lot of the time we identify film photographs with these characteristics. And these characteristics have a lot to do with imperfections. Imperfections that the Canon G7X Mark II provides. The first one being the blooming. The photographs taken with the Canon G7X Mark II have this specific way of blooming that, at least to me, identifies very similarly with highlights of a film photograph. So goes with the flaring. Flaring has more to do with the lens than the film itself. Most of the lenses used back in those days had a lot of imperfections with them, and the one being flaring or ghosting. The next one has to do with grit and grain. The ISO performance on this camera isn't perfect, but that's exactly what it makes it feel almost like a film camera. The noise on this camera, at least to me, looks quite synonymous with film grain, and it's really hard to pinpoint, but it does look quite satisfying. Another important factor about film that this camera provides quite well is color. The color of the photographs taken with the Canon G7X Mark II have a certain richness to them, as well as this kind of level of desaturation. And the thing about film and the colors they possess is that they aren't that highly or densely saturated, but they have a nice pop to them. That is something I recognize that the Canon G7X Mark II provides. The camera surprisingly provides high performance. It has very quick autofocus. It somehow just knows what to do in most circumstances, and I'm quite surprised because it is a 6 to 7 year old camera. To me, the beauty of this camera especially comes from its simplicity and how kind of carefree you can be with it. Open disclosure, I've dropped it many times on concrete, and it still runs very well. It turns on and starts very quickly. You can just quickly take a photo. The autofocus is fast. But again, to me, it's these imperfections that make the camera very carefree and simple to use, and makes it feel like I'm using a very antique film camera. I've had many instances where I post photos that I've taken with a Canon G7X Mark II on Instagram or Twitter, and people think I've been shooting those photographs on film. And I don't do very heavy editing on my photographs, so I think that kind of speaks for itself. People just can't really tell, especially on a little phone screen. Okay, we have that part of the video out of the way. I've been using this camera for about 2 years now, and I don't know, time just kind of keeps on creeping by, and I don't know, it's funny that now I have other cameras to use, but the G7X Mark II ends up sitting in my pocket most of the time. I just love having a pocketable zoom these days, especially with COVID. Kind of society interacts with, or people interact with environment very differently now, and having an option to zoom in and out is very, very helpful. I've taken award-winning photos with this photograph, strangely enough, and I guess that's also a reason why I keep on going back to it, is because I know that it has that potential. I know that it can deliver images that people love. And now that we're kind of at the end, I wanted to talk about, well, maybe not exactly like film cameras versus digital cameras, but I wanted to talk about kind of the interesting timeline we're in right now, where, you know, the earlier digital cameras these days, the earlier digital cameras of the era, I think, are now starting to inch closer to, you know, vintage territory. And they are starting to look very different. A good example being, I think the Leica M9 is like a cult classic now because the colors are very rich. The first Leica SL is also amazing. And people are making videos on cameras with OVFs, or like the early DSLRs, right? And there is a certain beauty to the image, I have to admit. It's different. And again, going back to what I mentioned in the very beginning of this video, all the cameras these days are just amazing, but everything is so perfect that we have to kind of noisy up the image or the photograph in post, because the white balance is perfect. Everything is so neutral, because the image quality is so high, because the stabilization is amazing. You don't get blurry images maybe that's also that can also be a problem. And the ISO performance is so high that there's less and less grit to the images. And I guess the proposal of this video was that, hey, maybe try to use older cheaper, dirtier digital cameras because they have quite nice and rich colors and they have the imperfections. It just happens to be, I think, that my Canon G7X Mark II is old enough and it's a total package because it's a point and shoot. It comes with the lens. It's getting old. I'm beating it up a lot. So that's also creating imperfections, I think. And yeah, that was the gist of the video. Thank you very much for watching. Thanks for supporting the channel. I'll see you guys in the next one. Goodbye. Sayonara.